Welcome back to my read-along of A Tale of Stars and Shadow. Today we are up to chapter 17 and I'm going to jump right in. Talyn pushed her new wing hard. It would take months of dedicated training before they were capable fighters, and in the meantime, strength, speed and stamina would be the only advantages they had. Her main hope, however, was that they would become united by their shared exhaustion and physical misery. The added side benefit was that they were often too tired to fight or snap at each other. A winged boy appeared at her room early in the evening 8 days after she'd fished Theak out of jail. It had been an especially hot day, and she was contemplating whether she could be bothered walking down to Dock City to see if Andrus was free. Mid-2 month was looming, and she'd been so caught up with the effort required to keep her wing together and listening to her that she'd yet to make any further progress on her investigation into the Shadowhawk. Anxiety curled in her gut. "You haven't even been here a month," Sari reminded her. "A month used to be plenty of time for us to solve a problem like this." "Stop it. We were intimately familiar with Port Lithili and its surrounds. You're in a different country with wildly different customs and expectations. It's going to take time, Talyn." Despite Sari's reassurances, she'd made the decision to go and visit Andrus when the knock came at her door. The boy didn't look any older than 10 or 11 and beamed up at her with a toothy smile. Someone had attempted to run a comb through the unruly mop of curls on his head, but it had been in vain. A pair of bright emerald wings rustled at his back, half unfurled as if he were ready to leap into flight at any moment. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Prince Cuinn a Condor would like to see you, Captain." He bobbed his head. "I'm to bring you as soon as you're ready." "Give me a moment." Talyn ducked back inside to pull on a fresh shirt rather than the one she'd sweated through drill in, then replait her damp hair. Once done, she reopened the door. "Let's go." By now she was confident of her way around the palace, but she let the boy take her to the bridge that led across to Cuinn's tower. The front door was, of course, unguarded. The boy knocked and they waited patiently for an answer. "What's your name?" she asked him. "I'm Willa Wingswept," he announced proudly. "I'm Prince Cuinn's page." He looked inordinately proud of himself, and Talyn couldn't help but smile. "That's a high honour for someone so young. How old are you?" "Just turned 13, Captain," he brightened at her words. "Nobody else thinks it's an honour. The other pages sneer at me. They say Prince Cuinn isn't important enough." "Everyone is important in their own way, Willa," she said seriously. "You should remember that." He laughed. "What they've been saying about you is right. You're not like most winged folk." She shuddered to think what they had been saying. "I'm not winged folk at all," she said. "Maybe," his thin shoulders straightened, "but I like you." She was still fighting back a smile when Cuinn's musical voice sounded from inside, inviting her in. Assuming a serious expression, Willa opened the door and gestured for her to enter. "I'll see you again soon?" he asked hopefully. "Count on it." She shook his hand solemnly, and he flashed her a grin before running off and launching into flight. It was cool inside despite the heat of the day and the arched windows letting in the orange glow of the setting sun. The sky-blue carpet was soft under her boots, the furniture sparse but tasteful. A table by the lounge, a small desk, and a case filled with stacks of parchment and the occasional book. A spiral stairway in the far corner joined other floors of the tower, mostly for show, she presumed. The one oddity was a small flute sitting on the desk. Apart from a quill and ink pot, nothing else rested on its bare surface. There was no chair near it. A door abruptly opened on the other side of the room, and Cuinn appeared. Again, everything about him was carefully styled to enhance his natural beauty. The sleeveless satin shirt in midnight blue with the top buttons artfully undone, atop fitted breeches in ivory that ended in casually bare feet. His blonde hair was wet and stuck up in a messy spikes, a casualty of the rough dry he was giving it with a towel. "Sorry," he sounded anything but as he offered a lazy smile, eyes running over her from head to toe. "I just came back from a rather energetic game of Alea, and I thought I should freshen up before meeting you." "That's fine," she said. She had no clue what Alea was, and deliberately looked away to keep her irritation at his entire manner from being completely obvious. She frowned at the realization that there were no bolts or latches on the window. "You're angry." "What?" She turned at the sound of his voice. "You're angry." He motioned to her. "I can sense it. Did I do something to annoy you?" For a moment she was utterly confused. Her voice and expression had remained neutral since she'd stepped into the room, a soldier speaking with her charge. But then she remembered Theak telling her about the magic of the winged folk. "You can read my emotions? I thought you could only project them." "It's rare, but the more powerful ones, like me, can do both." He winked. "I normally don't pry, but I couldn't help but sense your anger just then. It's coming off you in waves." His gaze narrowed, voice turning distant before trailing off entirely. The expression on his face turned inwards, and sudden terror seized her. The idea that this prince might see what was inside her, the broken parts and suffocating grief. "Stop!" Her voice ripped through the room, laden with Dumnoric's command and a hint of desperation. Cuinn recoiled as if stung, dragging himself out of his daze, green eyes snapping to hers. His mouth opened, but she spoke before he could register what happened, and this time she managed a cool but firm tone. "I would prefer my emotions remain private, Your Highness," she said, "and if you're wondering why I'm annoyed, you might consider that I don't appreciate being looked at up and down like I'm a particularly attractive piece of meat every time I'm in your presence." He laughed. The bastard actually laughed. The amusement lit up his face as he dropped onto the nearest sofa, wings spread wide to either side of him. "I can't help it if you're a beautiful woman, Captain Dynan." He cocked his head to the side. "In fact, one of your parents at least must have been winged folk. You have the look of one of us about you." "My parents are not relevant, Your Highness. What is relevant is that I was sent here to do a job, and you have not allowed me to do it." She took a breath, fighting bitterly to drag the conversation back on track. "I'm hoping that's why you've asked to see me this afternoon." The amusement faded, boredom sweeping in its place. "Bringing you to Mithrana wasn't my idea, and I've told you already that I don't want or need any sort of protection. Do you think I enjoy being laughed at by my brothers and my friends about having a misfit human guard made up of criminals?" "I think you're deliberately choosing to believe you don't need protection because it's easier," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "And if you think for 1 second that I have anything to do with whatever ulterior motives are at play here, well, let me say this. I've been training to be a warrior since childhood, Prince Cuinn, and I take what I do very seriously. I have dedicated my life to it." "How very stirring," he said, rolling his eyes and heaving a massive sigh. "I understand you have 2 elder brothers." She forced patience into her tone and expression, pushing down her annoyance. "But things happen. What if one of them took ill, or—" His chuckle cut her off. "I'm never going to be in line for the throne of Mithrana, Captain." At her raised eyebrows, he gave a languid shrug. "For a start, I'm illegitimate." "Oh." She kept her mouth closed with an effort. She hadn't expected that. Sienna had said Cuinn's Dumnoric's blood came from a different branch of the family tree, but she just assumed as a prince he would be legitimate. She still didn't feel that instinctive kinship with him that she did with Arya and Arthane, although that might be because her irritation with his entire manner was overpowering it. "We're not too fussy about that sort of thing here, and when my mother took a lover after her husband's death, it was hard to be discreet when she felt pregnant in any case." Another shrug, his attention almost entirely taken by an invisible piece of lint on the hem of his shirt. "But the winged folk nobles would never accept me as king, and not only because of that. Trust me on this, Captain." Once again he'd veered the conversation off track, and she struggled to bring it back, some of her frustration finally escaping into the sharp edge in her tone. "Despite that, you might also consider that those you just called misfits will be responsible for keeping you alive. They are, each and every one of them, worthwhile men, and they are sweating and working every day to learn how to be warriors. They have my respect, and they should have yours too." As inspirational as that little speech was, those misfits would be lucky if, collectively, they could keep a cat alive. He stretched out lazily. "And I realize you haven't been here long, but if you use that disapproving tone with anyone else in my family, you'll likely be flogged. Not a pleasant experience, so I don't recommend it." She faltered. "You're serious?" "Me being serious happens very rarely, but in this case, yes, I am," he said. "Mithrana is beautiful, Captain Dynan, but that beauty hides a lot of ugliness. You may have had the freedom to express your views to your superior officers back home, but don't do it here." He shifted, the boredom coming back to his face. "That advice applies for the dinner being held in 3 days' time." "Dinner?" she said blankly, stumped by the sudden turn in conversation. "Yes, my mother is holding one of her regular dinner parties. I have been instructed to make sure my wing is there." He waved a hand. "I'll need at least 2 of you, or whatever you think best. Try to make them look marginally presentable if you can. I'd rather not have a ragtag bunch of petty criminals show up as my guard. Please ask them to avoid tripping over their shoelaces or doing something equally embarrassing." "I can do that," Talyn said stiffly. "Excellent." He reached forward to pour from a carafe of wine on the table. "That will be all, Captain. Your irritation with me is quickly reaching painful levels." "Lucky I'm not there. I would punch him." "I don't get it," she said in utter mystification as she left Cuinn's tower without another word. "Flogging? This place is just a nightmare." Something like that, she said to Sari, lifting a hand to her suddenly aching temples. She'd taken so much for granted growing up in the Twin Thrones without any real knowledge of the outside world apart from the lessons taught in her schooling and then at Cuinn and Talyn. She'd known Mithranor had a queen, that the Windfolk had magic, and that they were the world's only producer of Iserdia. But that there was a place in the world where people thought they were superior because they had wings and magic, where the ruling family thought it was acceptable to flog people for disagreeing with them, or to hoard food for themselves. That she hadn't known. And her father. He'd never said a word about any of this, despite how much of a shock it must have been for a human from Dock City to settle in the Twin Thrones, married to a Dimnorix with their views on ruling. Why? Talyn told her wing about the dinner following the wall run the next morning. After almost a month of training, they were beginning to show improvement. Running up the wall was still a gasping, exhausting experience, but they could make the full distance at a run now. Once she'd finished, they glanced at each other or at their shoes. Theak glowered at Zamaril. "We already know," he grunted. "You do? How?" She frowned at him. "Our resident thief was listening at the window when you spoke to the prince yesterday." Tierslin looked torn between horror and amusement at the audacity of such a thing. "6 thrices! I'll murder him!" "I see." She tried to keep her voice even. Usually that was easy for her. She'd never found it difficult to maintain a cool calm, no matter the situation, which was why she and Sari had always worked so well together. But leading this wing was like wrangling a group of wild cats. Sari chuckled gleefully inside her head. "I wanted to know what he was saying to you." Zamaril spoke with his usual cockiness, but he was shifting his weight from foot to foot. "And I wanted to know whether you meant all that flea shit you've been giving us about trust and respect." "What he did was wrong," Cuinn said unexpectedly, giving Zamaril a disappointed look. "I'm glad her lord walloped his ear for it." Talyn shot a startled glance at the thief, noticing his reddened left ear for the first time. He scowled, gaze dropping to the ground. She then swung her gaze to Halun, who stood with his arms crossed, looking thoroughly unapologetic. "You did say we had to trust each other," Tierslin pointed out, cocking his head as if trying to remember. "At least 6 times that I recall, although there was probably more. I don't always pay attention when you start lecturing. Spying isn't trust." She swallowed a sigh that almost wanted to be a laugh. "I agree, and I meant what I said. But we also need to avoid hitting each other where possible. Next time, Halun, talk to Theak or myself if you have a concern." "Zamaril told us what you said to Prince Cuinn," Cuinn said, directing a pointed look at the thief, "and we'd like to say thank you." "All of us," Theak said, elbowing Zamaril sharply in the ribs. The thief scowled. "I still don't get it. You want us to trust you, but I can't even figure out what you're doing here in the first place. A King's Shield helping out the Wingguard. It doesn't make any sense." She settled a thoughtful gaze on him. This thief was smart, an intelligence born of a life where he'd had only himself to rely on for survival, and he'd been pushing her every single second since joining the wing. The pushing she could take, but she was starting to wonder whether there was more to it. "It's not a secret," she said evenly. "Your royal family requested a King's Shield guard to assist in training the Falcons. King Arthane agreed on the one condition that my services were paid for with a rather large shipment of Iserdia. So why are you here instead of training the Falcons?" This was from Cuinn, who sounded genuinely curious. "I don't know. I'm a soldier just like you. I came here as ordered, and when I arrived, the Falcon told me I'd be building a new wing for Prince Cuinn's protection. So that's what I'm doing." "For how long?" Zamaril challenged. They all glanced at each other at his question, and she didn't shy away from the truth. She would take his challenges and throw them back every time until he learned to trust or he walked away. Now she pinned him with her gaze until he began looking uncomfortable. "I've already told you. A year. Now, have I answered your questions sufficiently, or would you like to interrogate me further?" The thief scowled again. "No, Captain." He hesitated. "And yes, I appreciate what you said too." "I meant every word," she said, then gave Zamaril the fiercest look she could. "If I ever hear about you following me around or eavesdropping on my conversations again, I will be furious. Understand?" His face tightened. "Yes, Captain." Theak cleared his throat. "What do you require from us from this dinner?" "First, no wearing of shoelaces," Tierslin grinned. Talyn allowed them their chuckles before turning back to business. "We'll all be participating. I don't expect any problems, so it will be a learning experience. You've all been undertaking basic weapon skills and building up your strength and conditioning, but you also need to start learning about the practice of guarding someone." They had all been focusing intently on her words, but as she got to the end, their attention started to wander. Even Corin's eyes shifted to gaze at some point over her shoulder. She turned, forced to bite down a surge of irritation at the sight of Cuinn standing there with another winged man. "You're angry again," he said as she approached, faint reproof in his voice. "Not at all, Your Highness," she said smoothly. "What can we do for you?" "I've come to speak to my guards." He gave her an amused grin, indicating he knew full well how annoyed she was, before moving past to stand in front of the men. She shifted, positioning herself so that if he said something insulting, she could stop Zamaril from doing anything stupid. The prince's companions stayed back. "You're a sorry-looking lot," Cuinn noted, eyeing them over with a disdainful air. He stood with one hand in his pocket, the other languidly reaching up to sweep his hair back from his face. "But we're stuck with each other for now, and I'd like to make sure you reflect positively on me tomorrow night. After that, we can happily go back to ignoring each other." "Yes, Your Highness." Theak managed to force his head into a polite nod. The other four muttered an assent. Muted sullenness was written all over their faces, even Talyn's. Clearly Zamaril had related every part of the conversation he'd overheard. Cuinn glanced at Talyn, a hint of laughter on his face. "They all look very enthusiastic about protecting my life, don't they? I shall definitely sleep better at night." He was completely right, but he was genuinely amused by it rather than concerned. Either he was oddly confident that his life would never be in danger, or he was a fool. She was beginning to suspect the latter. Before she could respond, he swung back to them. "You will all need proper uniforms. It's horrifying to think you've been wandering around up here in those rags." Cuinn paused. "I imagine none of you really want to be falcons, and the feeling is mutual, I'm sure. Choose a name and colours for yourselves, and Ain here will take your measurements. Your uniforms will be ready by evening." "We are representing you, Your Highness," Theak ventured gruffly. "Wouldn't you prefer to choose our colours?" "I really don't care, as long as it's something sensible." Cuinn's voice was bored now, and he turned to go, but Zamaril's voice stopped him. "I have an idea for a name, Your Highness." Talyn stifled a smile. Only Zamaril would have the nerve to speak so confidently to the prince. He stood with his arms crossed and smug expression in place, daring Cuinn to disapprove of him. The prince merely raised his eyebrows. "You're right. We don't want to be falcons. I think we should be called wolves." Talyn gasped in shock, while Halun and Corin simply turned to gape at Zamaril in horror. "Shut your mouth before I shut it for you, Zamaril," Theak barked. Talyn wondered what she was missing. She suspected if she'd known, she'd be putting Zamaril on dishes duty for months. The moment froze as everyone waited for Cuinn's reaction. He only laughed. "Fine. Wolves it is. I'll also make sure you get a full set of uniforms for spares, including proper boots and shoes. Extra weapons, too." "There are 6 of us, Prince Cuinn," Talyn objected. "The Falcon has already provided the weapons we need." He turned and smiled at her. "I will not have my wing like anything every other wing of the Wing Guard has. I'd be even more of a laughingstock if that were the case." "And we wouldn't want that," she said dryly. His smile widened. "Indeed not. I'll see you all tomorrow night." They watched as Cuinn lifted off with one mighty sweep of his silver wings. Talyn, still fascinated by the sight of a human flying, turned abruptly as Theak coughed to gain her attention. She turned back. "Tell me what that was all about." She gave Zamaril a dangerous stare. He flashed her an insolent look before dropping his gaze from hers. Theak glowered. "The Falcons don't go down into Dock City very often, but when they do, they hate it. They say it's like going into a den of mangy, starving wolves, on account of us being so dirty and noisy." She wasn't sure whether to laugh or be horrified. "Zamaril, do you want to get thrown back in the cells?" "Did you think of me at all while coming up with that stupid name?" Talyn spread his wings for effect. There was indignance in his voice, but a hint of real distress too. She didn't think the others picked up on it, but it was clear as day to her. "I'll never hear the end of it when my family finds out." "You've probably not noticed, what with how your pretty nose is stuck up in the air most of the time, but your kind are outnumbered in this wing," Zamaril remarked. "My kind?" Talyn took a step towards the thief, insult hardening his handsome face. "Enough!" Theak stepped between them before Talyn could, placing a restraining hand on Talyn's chest. "Talyn, I'm sure you can understand why humans think the way they do about winged folk. And Zamaril, you'd better pipe down or you'll be cleaning shit from the privies for the next month. Am I clear?" The moment froze, Talyn finding herself freezing along with it. That Theak had stepped in before she could was a stunning development, but Zamaril simply wouldn't let his attitude go, and Talyn was nothing if not arrogant and proud. In the end, Talyn was the bigger man. Her shoulders relaxed as he nodded and stepped away from Theak's restraining hand, speaking stiffly. I am outnumbered in this wing, and it's only fair that our name be chosen by a group vote. Zamaril nodded sullenly. I vote for the wolves. As long as we're not falcons, I don't care what it is, Theak said. Corrin's gaze flickered to Talyn, but he said quietly, I don't want to be a falcon. I vote for being called wolves too. Halun simply gave a firm nod. Talyn spread his hands and shrugged. Fine. I'm already a joke anyway. Why not add to the hilarity? All right, the wolves it is, Talyn sighed. She wasn't sure allowing the name was a good idea. Deliberately irritating a group of people that already didn't want them wasn't smart, but she'd been seeking a way to give her wing an identity, something that could bring them together, and this might be it. On one condition. I hear even a whisper of you giving Talyn a bad time about the name, and you'll be falcons no matter how much you hate it. He's shown his respect for you by allowing you to choose the name in a vote. You show him the same respect. Am I clear? Yes, Captain. Theak and Corrin spoke at the same time, sharp and loud. Halun reached out and shoved Zamaril so hard he almost fell, then gave her a satisfied nod. She stifled another smile. I'll leave you to work out what colours you'd like to wear. Please decide in time for Ain to get the uniforms ready for the dinner. The poor winged man was still lingering awkwardly just out of earshot. Theak, if they bicker, you get the deciding vote. Yes, Captain. Zamaril, a moment, please. He reluctantly followed her away from the group. Captain, if you're going to ride me about suggesting the name, it's not that. She looked him hard in the eyes. You realize Talyn was the better man back there, I hope. Your behaviour and attitude were poor, and you should be ashamed about it. His lip curled. I don't live by your stupid rules of fairness and trust. I'll do as I'm ordered so I can stay alive and not go back to the cells, but I've lived with only myself to rely on for my entire life, and you've shown me absolutely no good reason why that should change. And what good reason have I shown you not to trust me? Trust us, she asked quietly. You've been following me around and spying on me after all. His face tightened. You're afraid, and I get that, she continued. Being alone can feel safe. It means you don't have to fear losing something. Trust me, I know. How do you know? He asked quietly. She couldn't do it. She couldn't share with him. It was too hard, too raw. When he realized she wasn't willing to tell him, his face hardened. Right there, he said. That's my good reason. He was gone before she could say or do anything. Her hands clenched at her sides as she fought tears. A letter from Tarkos arrived that afternoon, waiting on her doorstep when she returned to her room. The sight of it, of word from home, from someone she cared about, was welcome after the fight with Zamaril, easing some of the tight clutch of despair in her chest. She sank onto her soft couch, ripping the seal open and unfolding the letter within. Talyn, I got your letter yesterday. It certainly sounds like you've been given a challenge, but I'm sure you'll get your new unit up and running in no time. I have great faith in you. You should too. I've got some news of my own. My uncle has given me permission to join Prince Ariar's Aimsier battalion in the north to gain some fighting and command experience. Apparently the brigand encampments throughout the mountains have been growing these past months, and King Arthane is keen to increase his forces in the area. I think the fact I'll be taking my personal bearman detachment helped sway the king in my favour once my uncle agreed. Don't worry though, I'll be back in Ryathel by the time you return. Leviana and Cinia asked me to pass along their greetings. They've just been given a new assignment somewhere out west. They wouldn't tell me where, of course, and they asked me to tell you they miss you and can't wait till you get back. I'd better go. Lord Markham has invited me to dine with him this evening. A friend of ours has recommended a troubadour group playing in Ryathel until 3 months, and Markham has invited them for a private show at his residence. There's not much else to say aside from I miss you, Tal, and I wish you were here. I'm counting the days until you get back. Yours, Lord Tarkos Hadvisa. After reading it, she carefully put the letter down and sank further into the cushions. Tarkos was joining Ariar's Aimsier battalion in the Aelmire Mountains. Brigand numbers were on the rise again. Tears pricked her eyes despite her best efforts to hold them back. She had to stop this. Tarkos was thrilled, and she needed to be happy for him. She was happy for him. Fighting with Ariar would give him valuable experience he'd need if he wished to become his uncle's heir. It's what he had wanted for a long time now. But working against the brigands, reducing their numbers, keeping the roads across the mountains safe for travellers and merchants alike, that had once been her job, hers and Sari's. They'd had other assignments too, of course, one memorable one involving infiltrating a gang of violent smugglers in Port Lithili. But more often than not, they worked against the ragtag yet well-organised, well-supplied and heavily armed criminals that used the rugged and isolated Aelmire mountain range to grow and thrive. She'd loved it. Loved the life, the challenge, the hunt, and the fight. Better yet, they'd been good at it. More than good. The effect she and Sari, in concert with the local Aimsier and other Callanan posted there, had on brigand activities had been noticeable. Now their numbers were growing again. And there was Fireflare. She missed her Aimsier mare constantly. The bond between horse and rider so strong that the mare wouldn't let anyone else touch her while Talyn was away. She wanted that life back so badly she ached, and at the same time she never wanted to go near it ever again, because it had been her fault that... Tears threatened, and she bit her lip, almost hard enough to draw blood, refusing to let them fall. She needed a distraction. Forcing herself up and out of her chair, Talyn went to the desk and yanked open the drawer. Inside she kept scrawled notes of her observations on the Shadowhawk. They wouldn't make sense to anyone but her and Sari. They'd developed their own shorthand over years working together, but they mostly revolved around the 2 notices she'd seen since her arrival in Mithrana and what she'd learned from her conversation with Andrus. After spreading the notes across the desktop, she studied them, forcing her brain to think, to focus on something other than Tarkos's letter and her run-in with Zamaril and how both had made her feel. Cuinn had said the Shadowhawk's notes sometimes forced the Wingguard into sharing Wingfolk supplies for fear of a riot or other trouble with Izerdia extraction. And sure enough, she heard the wolves talking over lunch the previous day. Corinn's mother had told him that some of the recent shipment of seeds was beginning to be distributed throughout the wealthy quarter. But from what she'd seen of the Wingguard so far, they wouldn't take kindly to being forced into action by the Shadowhawk. Her mind snagged on that, turning it over. No, they'd want some kind of retribution, or at least a way to lash out, Sari agreed. But they haven't been able to catch the Shadowhawk, Talyn answered absently. So they'd go after his network, perhaps? Or anyone, really. After your experience with them so far, I can't see them being particularly discerning. You're right. And remember what Andrus said about the man I caught on my first day, the one linked to the Shadowhawk? He said the man had gone to jail, but that usually the Shadowhawk would have intercepted him before that. Talyn shoved the parchment back into her drawer and reached for her cloak. This wasn't going to be as hard as she'd thought. Andrus Ty was on duty when she walked into the Market Quarter Patrol Headquarters, standing by the main desk chatting with Lidrin, the young patrolman she'd met on her first day. Captain Dynan! Once again, Ty looked surprised to see her. I hope there's nothing wrong. No, she assured him, glancing at Lidrin with an apologetic smile. He beamed back at her. Do you have a moment to chat? Ty glanced ruefully toward the door leading to the back room. I'm in the middle of questioning one of our less scrupulous jewel sellers, but I could use a break. Let's step outside. It's stupidly warm in here. It wasn't that much cooler on the landing outside, but at least there was a faint sluggish breeze moving through the streets. Ty settled himself against the railing, able from there to keep a watchful eye through to the foyer, as well as see anyone coming up from the street. I came because I wanted to thank you for what you did for Theak. It was her pretense for coming to talk to Andrus about the Shadowhawk, but as the words came out, she realized that she meant them. From what I've gathered about the patrol so far, not many others would have given me the opportunity to help him. I heard you kept him in your wing. His words were without emotion, giving no indication of what he thought of that. I did. Everyone deserves a second chance. It's a risk, keeping a drunk on a protective unit. Ty shifted. The Falcon would have tossed him out on his ear if he knew. A good thing he doesn't. She kept her voice as toneless as his. Not yet. Most of the patrol knows about it by now. My men, a slight tightening of his mouth, don't always keep their mouths shut. Some of them are in the pocket of the Falcons. He was warning her. Her estimation for this patrolman rose incrementally, along with more questions. Why are you in the patrol, Andrus? To help where I can. He crossed his arms, clearly not interested in divulging any more. My turn. What really brings you down here tonight, Captain? She weighed her words, deciding against pretending she didn't have another reason for coming. Cuinn told me the Shadowhawk's notices resulted in some of the recent shipment of seeds being distributed throughout the city. True. Andrus nodded. It all went to merchants in the wealthy quarter, but still, it's better than none coming down here at all. That wouldn't have pleased the Falcons, I imagine, being forced into action like that. Ty pushed off the railing, taking 2 steps back toward the open door and pausing there. No, they weren't. But I don't see what this has to do with your job here, Captain. Who did they arrest? She asked softly. He let out a breath, looked away, then gave her a grim look when he glanced back. 2 dock workers are currently sitting in the dock quarter cells. I know the watch officer over there, and just between you and me, he has no clue why they were arrested. She nodded, hiding the flare of triumph that went through her at his words. How long have they been there? Since yesterday afternoon. Then the Shadowhawk should have heard about it by now. She flashed Andrus a smile. Good luck with your criminal jeweler. His chuckle followed her back out onto the street. And that's the end of chapter 17. I'm going to go and have a sip of water before launching into my author commentary. As always, if you don't want any spoilers, now's the time to jump out. Please consider liking and subscribing when you go. And it won't be too much longer before the next chapter is up, because this is starting to get real good and we've got some really killer chapters coming up. If you're leaving here now, I look forward to seeing you soon. Otherwise, stick around and let's have some author commentary. Okay, so a lot happened in this chapter. Let's break it down scene by scene. First, Talyn gets summoned to go and have a chat with Cuinn in his tower. And another super fun scene here to write, because Cuinn is being an amused, arrogant, and lazy jerk, basically. And Talyn is seething her way through that entire conversation, barely managing to stay professional, but doing so. And to be honest, I don't think I'd have lasted that long if I was in that conversation with him. But we do have that interesting moment where he digs, well, it doesn't even really dig, but his song magic starts to pick up on her grief, and she can see that's what's happening and just yanks him out of that as quickly as possible and changes the subject and moves on. But his ability to just so easily read how annoyed she is with him, even though she's like being super professional and not letting on at all, is just increases her irritation even more. And it's incredibly funny to write, even though it's probably not a huge amount of fun for poor Talyn, because I think Cuinn's having a lot of fun with it as well. And then she has the conversation with the wolves later on, in which she finds out that Zamaril was listening at the window through the whole conversation with Cuinn. Zamaril really has a problem trusting. He's still suspicious of her motives, and he's helping out Cuinn as well in terms of his persona as a Shadowhawk and trying to find information. You can see he feeds in the Shadowhawk questions very cleverly in this conversation with Talyn. But it's not just that, right? Zamaril doesn't know what to make of her, and he's really trying to find the answer. And he wants to find the answer that proves that she can't be trusted, but he's not finding it. He listened to this conversation. She defends them, and she doesn't even know that he's there, and they're not standing in the room. And obviously he tells the rest of the wolves about that, and that kind of makes them even more firmly bonded towards her, even though Zamaril's still refusing to trust. And then he pokes at Cuinn quite deliberately by suggesting the name of the wolves. And Cuinn takes that with a laugh, because fortunately for him, that does fit in with his kind of languid, amused, arrogant persona. So he's able to accept that. And the wolves are born, which is kind of cool. That was a very, very fun conversation. And then we have a bit more of Talyn wrestling with herself, and Sari kind of getting mildly annoyed and being like, come on, Talyn, we know how to do this. Stop wallowing in your grief. And she kind of needs to hear that a little bit. The letter that she gets from home from Tarkos reminds her about the life that she used to have with Sari, how much she used to have that life, and how no matter how things may play out for Talyn in the future, good, bad, or otherwise, she would still, every moment of every day, choose that life that she had that is now gone. And that's part of the grief. It's not just Sari that she's lost and that she's missing. It's the life that they had together, which was the life that Talyn always wanted, and that she'll never be able to have again. But she does dig herself out of that with Sari's prompting, and she heads back down to speak to Andrus. And again, as much as she kind of thinks she's broken and thinks she's no good anymore, it takes her very, very short amount of time to figure out how to track down the Shadowhawk, and that's by knowing how he operates. That if people have been imprisoned wrongly for something that he's done, he's going to try and get them out, and that's how she's going to get him. And then we'll have that chapter coming up soon, which I can't wait for. So any comments, any questions, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to answer any questions that you have. I'm having a lot of fun. I hope you are too. I will see you soon for chapter 18. Have a great day.